The same company that builds the Outboard hanging off the back of your fishing boat just put its engines on US Navy attack drones. Mercury Marine, the brand you see on bass boats and center consoles at every marina in America, is now powering uncrewed war machines for the United States Navy. This isn't a rumor or a rendering. Brunswick, the company that owns Mercury, announced it on May 8th, and within days, those boats were running real operations off the coast of Florida. Now, before your imagination runs too far, let me tell you exactly what these things are, because the reality is stranger than the headline. These aren't warships with sailors on deck. They're robot boats. No crew, no helm, nobody aboard at all. They drive themselves. The Navy tested them carrying weapons, and the engine making them move is the same basic Mercury technology a regular person can walk into a dealership and buy. There's a reason the Navy went that route instead of building its own engine from scratch. And it's not the reason you'd guess. Let's lay out what actually happened, because the facts here are on the record and they moved fast. On May 8, 2026, Brunswick Corporation announced that its boats, its Mercury Marine engines, and its Navico electronics would form the platform for something called the Tsunami program. Tsunami is a line of uncrewed service vessels built by Textron Systems, a major U.S. defense contractor. The contract behind it came from the Defense Innovation Unit, which is the arm of the Pentagon whose entire job is pulling commercial technology into military use as fast as possible. If the term uncrewed surface vessel sounds abstract, think of it simply. It's a self-driving boat. The same idea as a self-driving car, except it operates on the water, guided by onboard software and remote control, with no human on board to steer it or get hurt if something goes wrong. Textron supplies the brains, the autonomy system that lets the boat navigate and complete its mission on its own. Brunswick supplies the body and the muscle, the hull and the Mercury propulsion that actually moves it through the water. These weren't sitting in a warehouse as a science project either. In late April, multiple Tsunami boats took part in the U.S. Navy's fleet experimentation exercise out of Key West, Florida. That deployment kicked off 3 months of joint operations with U.S. Southern Command and the Navy's 4th Fleet. The command's responsible for a huge stretch of ocean across the Caribbean and Latin America. So this is happening now, in real water with real Navy units, not someday in a budget proposal. Here's what makes the Tsunami approach genuinely clever, and why the military wanted it. The system is designed as a kit. Textron can take a commercial boat and convert it from crewed to uncrewed in a matter of hours. Different engine sizes, different fuel types, depending on the mission. That flexibility is the entire point. The Navy doesn't have to design a brand new warship from a blank sheet, which takes years and costs a fortune. They take a proven boat that already works, bolt on the autonomy kit, and they have an unmanned asset ready to go. And these boats are built to do more than scout around. At the Key West exercise, the program demonstrated a system called STAKE, a surface-to-air kinetic engagement capability. In plain terms, they tested the robot boat working alongside crewed Navy vessels in an armed role. That's the part that earns the word war in warboat. The vision is a group of small, fast boats that can be sent into dangerous situations where you'd never want to risk a crew, working in coordination with the manned fleet. The reason the Navy is chasing this right now comes down to a hard lesson playing out on the other side of the world. And this is the part that makes the whole story click into place. For the last 3 years, the world has been watching a smaller, poorer Navy humiliate a much larger one using boats that cost about as much as a nice car. Ukraine, a country whose conventional Navy was almost wiped out early in the war, started building cheap unmanned surface vessels and sending them across the Black Sea at Russian warships. The results rewrote the rulebook. Ukrainian sea drones have sunk or damaged enough of Russia's Black Sea fleet that, by most estimates, Russia lost roughly a third of it. One swarm of these boats took out a Russian warship valued at around $65 million. The drones doing the sinking cost somewhere between $50,000 and $250,000 each. Sit with that ratio for a second, because admirals all over the world have been doing exactly that. A boat that costs less than a luxury sedan with nobody aboard, destroying a warship worth tens of millions. Ukraine pushed it even further, turning some of these unmanned boats into motherships that launch their own aerial drones. And in one case, a sea drone shot down 2 Russian helicopters. The first time in history a surface drone scored that kind of kill. That is the backdrop for what the US Navy's doing in Key West. The Navy watched cheap robot boats change the math of naval power in real time, and it is now racing to build its own fleets of them. And the pressure isn't only coming from the Black Sea. Defense planners are openly worried about a possible Chinese blockade of Taiwan, a scenario where the United States would need a lot of expendable, low-cost boats fast. Because sending crewed ships into that kind of fight is exactly what everyone wants to avoid. Expensive, exquisite warships that take years to build no longer answer that question. Cheap and scalable does. That shift in thinking is why a program like Tsunami exists, and why the Pentagon's Innovation Office moved on it as quickly as it did. So now the real question. Of all the engine makers in the world, why did a defense program built for the US Navy end up running on the same brand sold to weekend anglers? The answer is the part of this story that actually matters for you, and it comes down to 2 things the public rarely connects. The first is where Mercury builds its engines. Mercury is the only one of the major outboard manufacturers that builds its motors in the United States at its plant in Fond du Lac, Wisconsin. For a defense contract, that's not a small detail. The military strongly prefers a domestic supply chain it can count on, especially right now when tariffs and trade tension have made foreign-built engines more complicated and more expensive. Mercury's competitors, Yamaha, Honda, and Suzuki, all build their outboards in Asia. When the Pentagon went looking for a proven engine made on American soil at serious scale, the list of candidates was very short. The second reason is reliability, and this is where it loops straight back to your boat. The military didn't pick an exotic, custom-built power plant for these vessels. They picked commercial, off-the-shelf marine propulsion. They did that on purpose. When a robot boat is operating on its own 100 miles offshore with a weapon aboard, the engine cannot be a question mark. It has to start, run, and keep running with no human present to nurse it along, choke it, or bleed an airlock out of a fuel line. The fact that the Navy trusted standard Mercury propulsion for that role tells you something concrete about how far that technology has come. There's an efficiency logic to it as well. The whole appeal of the drone boat model is low cost and fast production. The moment you design a bespoke military engine, you've blown up both of those advantages. You've added years of development and a fortune in cost. By specifying an engine that already rolls off a production line by the thousands, with a dealer and parts network already blanketing the country, the program stays cheap and it stays fast. The commercial engine isn't a compromise here. It's the entire strategy. Now, I'll be straight up with you because that's the whole point of this channel, right? So there's a money story underneath the patriotism. Brunswick's first quarter of 2026 was rough on the cash flow side, with the company posting negative free cash flow for the period. The recreational boat market has been soft for 2 years running. So this defense move isn't only about serving the country. It's also a company that makes most of its money selling pleasure boats looking for a new, steadier source of revenue that doesn't rise and fall with how many families decide to buy a bass boat in a given spring. Defense contracts are dependable income, and Brunswick needs dependable income right now. Both things are true at the same time. Here's the part that civilians genuinely don't know, the thing buried under the headline about Navy warboats. The militarization of these vessels is running on civilian technology. It's not the other way around. For decades, the story almost always ran one direction. The military developed something advanced, spent a fortune on it, and years later, a watered-down version trickled down to consumers. GPS started as a military system. The internet started as a defense project. We're used to military tech eventually becoming civilian tech. What's happening with these boats is the reverse. The civilian outboard came first, got good through years of being sold to ordinary boaters and beaten up in saltwater every weekend. And the military reached down and grabbed it because it already worked. The engine proved itself on millions of regular boats, and that track record is exactly what qualified it for a weapon. And for you, the everyday boater, that flips the usual relationship in a genuinely interesting way. The durability and the digital control systems the Navy's now trusting with live missions are the same systems working their way through the consumer lineup. The smart engine management, the self-monitoring, the integration between the motor and the electronics that lets a boat practically run itself. When the Pentagon decides a piece of marine technology is reliable enough to send into a potential combat zone with nobody aboard, that's a level of validation no marketing department could ever buy. In a strange roundabout way, the robot warboat is an enormous endorsement of the engine sitting on the back of your own boat. But there's a flip side, and it would be dishonest to skip it. Defense priorities now sit inside the company that makes your Outboard. When a recreational brand becomes a defense contractor, its attention and its engineering budget start getting pulled toward military work, because that's where the steady, high-margin money lives. Over time, that can quietly shape which engines get developed first, where the sharpest engineers spend their hours, and how the company prices and supplies the recreational side that you actually buy from. None of that is a problem today. It's just a direction worth watching, because the Mercury of 5 years from now could be a meaningful different company than the one whose logo's on your transom. And there's one more layer here that's easy to miss, and it's about what these boats say about where all marine technology is heading. The thing that makes a tsunami work isn't really the hull or even the engine. It's the autonomy. The software that lets the boat sense its surroundings, hold a course, avoid obstacles, and carry out a mission with no hand on the wheel. That same category of technology, scaled way down and stripped of the weapons, is the exact thing creeping into recreational boating right now. Self-docking systems, joystick piloting that lets one person park a 40-foot boat with a thumb. Engines that talk to the navigation electronics and trim themselves for efficiency. The military version and the consumer version are drinking from the same well. Brunswick owns the boats, the Mercury engines, and the Navico electronics, which means it controls the hull, the propulsion, and the brains all under one roof. That's the same vertical stack, whether the end product is a Navy drone or a luxury cruiser for a family in Florida. So when you watch the Navy push autonomous boats forward, you're also watching a preview of the technology that will define the high end of the consumer market over the next decade. The warboat and the weekend boat are being built from the same set of parts and the same set of ideas, and that convergence is only going to accelerate. So step back and look at what just happened. The wall between recreational boating and military hardware, which used to be a real and solid thing, is coming down. A company best known for putting families out on the lake on a Saturday is now supplying autonomous, weapon-capable boats to the United States Navy, and doing it with the same fundamental technology it sells to the public. That's a genuine change in what an outboard company even is. The thing to watch from here is whether this grows. Right now, it's a 3-month experimental deployment with Southern Command and the 4th Fleet. If those operations go well, the next step is a far larger production contract, and Brunswick's defense business stops being a side project and becomes a real pillar of the company. So keep an eye on what the Navy and Brunswick say when that 3-month window closes near the end of the summer. That announcement is the signal that tells you whether this was a one-time experiment or the opening move in something much bigger. The outboard bolted to the back of a Navy attack drone and the one bolted to the back of your boat came off the same fundamental idea, built by the same company in the same Wisconsin factory. The Navy just told the world it trusts that idea enough to send it into harm's way without a single person aboard. That's a louder statement about the engine on your transom than any ad Mercury will ever run. And it happened with almost nobody outside the defense world noticing.